Well, here they are again, Andrew, Chantal, and Bruce, ready to watch the long-awaited Conservative convention as it begins in Calgary. Chantal is there already. Andrew heads out from Toronto soon, and Bruce will watch from Ottawa. Well, Chantal, we'll start with you. It's been a bad couple of weeks for Stephen Harper. Signs of a revolution out there at all by the Conservative convention delegates?
Delegates, Peter, are like all Canadians. I think they have a lot of questions in mind, and they're all looking for the Prime Minister to provide some answers tomorrow night. I've covered quite a few reform and alliance conventions, and you'd show up sometimes and delegates would be really saying, you, the media, you're really making this up. But that is not the mood that I picked up today. And yes, they do talk to us, although we don't have access to the main hallway. And it's very much question mark after question mark.
No, it's interesting. I heard Stockwell Day earlier this evening telling Evan Solomon that, by the time Stephen Harper gets up to speak, he'll have a couple of lines in there about the Senate. Everybody will be up on their feet and cheering. Sure, there may be one or two people who are upset, but this is going to blow over very quickly. Andrew, what do you expect?
I can't say he's necessarily wrong. The party at the base level, the membership level, has stuck with this government and this leadership when they were doing all kinds of things that you would think would get the base up in arms, and they stuck with them. Now, granted, there are particularities about this issue. It involves illegality, it involves ethics, it involves Tories fighting amongst themselves, and I would certainly appreciate that they'd be more disconcerted than they would have been in the past. But there's so much organized around the central organizing principle that everybody is out to get us, everybody's against us, and that's a very unifying thing, and it essentially unifies them no matter what criticism gets lobbed at them. That just becomes proof of the central thesis.
Bruce?
Well, Peter, I don't expect that there's going to be any big explosion of discontent in Calgary this weekend, but I'm going to be watching for the difference between what I think of when I think of the word party loyalist versus party faithful. I think loyalists are people who will be loyal to the party no matter what it says, no matter what it does. But I think party faithful, who will be there in large numbers this weekend, are people for whom the idea of a party with integrity, with strong ethics, is something that they fight very hard for. And I think those people are going to be wondering whether or not the Prime Minister has been doing a good enough job of protecting their reputation, the reputation of the party that they work for, that they work to support, or whether he's maybe been putting his own interests first. And I think that's the nature of the discontent that we'll see, if we see any at all. But it'll be there, I think.
A couple of days ago. So go ahead, Chantal.
No, yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that. It's easy to say that the party base will applaud, and probably they will, but this is the grassroots that decided to turn away from Preston Manning because he didn't speak French, and they wanted someone who would take the party to power and make it a government and achieve their goals. And they are also the same party that turned away from Stockwell Day when he embarrassed them. And I think at the end of the day, this is not Stephen Harper's party as much as that Stephen Harper is currently their leader, and that's very much the mood here. You hear a lot of talk about what Jason Kenney had to say about Nigel Wright in the hallways. Basically, Jason Kenney said the hidden message was, no, Stephen Harper was not the victim of an unscrupulous chief of staff, despite what he may have said in the House of Commons. There's a big audience for Jason Kenney and for people who say things like that here, much larger than for people like us.
Okay, I want to get everybody's view on this Jason Kenney quote, but first let's show the audience exactly what it was. One of the popular within the Conservative Party cabinet ministers that exists for the Harper government. Here's what he told the Calgary Herald. I know Nigel Wright to be a person of good faith, of competence, with high ethical standards. And as far as I can tell, this was an uncharacteristic lapse of judgment on his part, both the decision to write a check and apparently the way it was handled thereafter. This just a day after the Prime Minister had called Nigel Wright deceptive in the House of Commons, and that hit like a bit of a bombshell. What's the significance? Chantal's given us her view, Bruce, of what Nigel Wright said.
Well, I think it's very...
what Jason Kenney said.
Yeah, I think it's very significant, Peter. I think there's an awful lot of undercurrents there that emanate from that comment. I think this week, obviously, the Prime Minister has been using Nigel Wright almost as his cleaning rag. And I think there are a lot of Conservatives who are upset about that, even if not very many of them are saying so publicly. So I think Jason Kenney was using coded comments to be, in effect, the unofficial voice for that segment of the party. And one thing I would say about Jason Kenney is he's very astute. He chose his words very carefully. But if he believed the Prime Minister's version of events, namely that Nigel Wright had concocted a phony story about a bank loan and encouraged Mike Duffy to tell that story as a lie to Canadians, I don't think Jason Kenney would have said what he said today.
Andrew?
He could not be unaware of the fact that people would be parsing his words very carefully, so it can't be written off as anything more than a significant statement, or less than a significant statement. I think it's also a statement about Jason Kenney and the position he occupies within that government and that cabinet. You know, there's many cabinet ministers who are there either because of their region or their ethnicity or because of their slavish loyalty to the Prime Minister and their willingness to parrot talking points. Jason Kenney's been able to carve out a position where he's there because he's basically indispensable, because he's handled some files very well and because he's very popular within the party. And part of that is because he's viewed as being a person of a more sort of principled demeanor than some of the other members of that government.
What's the task for Stephen Harper this weekend, starting with that speech tomorrow? What does he have to accomplish this weekend? Chantal?
He has to hit the right note. And on the Senate, they've been tone deaf. In the hallways, the spin you hear is that the approach is to say that the Senate stuff is just a distraction. I think he has to move away from that spin and reassure delegates that he can be part of the solution, that he's not just a Prime Minister plagued with headaches that he's mishandling.
Bruce?
Well, I think really there are three things. First of all, I agree with Chantal's point earlier that Stephen Harper has always enjoyed a certain high measure of respect from his party members, but he hasn't always been that kind of leader for whom there's a great deal of affection. And so I think he's got to try to do something to draw some affection towards him, to create more of an emotional bond between him and his party followers at this point. The other two things I think really go to honesty. Can he convince more of them that he is actually being honest of this, and maybe honest about this affair? And maybe the most important thing is the competency question. How has he been managing this crisis? Will they leave this weekend believing that he'll do a better job of managing it going forward?
Andrew?
I think he's got to be conscious that he's not just speaking to the base, even though he's got issues there. But he's got to be conscious that they've lost more than a quarter of the people who voted for them in the 2011 election. So he can't just be about reassuring the base. He's also got to give a sense of forward momentum, that there's a reason for this party to be in power. They thought they were going to get off on a good start with the Canada-Europe trade agreement. So he's not just going to talk about the Senate thing. He's also got to give a sense of a direction and momentum.
All right. Going to be interesting 48, 72 hours. We'll all be watching. Chantal's in Calgary, Andrew's on his way, and Bruce is in Ottawa.